divided, that the lies now won't. They say they're the truth.
Welcome back to the Spin Cycle. We're now just over 1 year into Donald Trump's second term, and let's be honest, it's been anything but quiet. We're seeing the full force of executive power in action. Military escalation with Iran that's raising serious questions about the line between showing strength and lasting foreign entanglement. A cartel strategy that shifted from decades of failed drug war policing on U.S. streets to designating the organizations behind the trade as terrorists. An immigration crackdown that's deported millions, including self-deportations, and changing the game on the border, plus a wave of sweeping executive orders that are hitting everything. New kids' savings accounts seeded with taxpayer money, forcing down prescription drug prices, barring Wall Street giants from snapping up starter homes, and even a flat-out ban on men competing in women's sports. Joining us to talk about that is former Libertarian vice presidential candidate, aeronautical engineer, White House economist, commercial finance expert, and has even spent a decade as a patrol officer in South Florida. He's run for Congress, chased the presidency, and since moved to the Republican Liberty Caucus, fighting for limited government and fiscal sanity from inside the Republican Party. He's a man that's seen policy from the top floors and the street level. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mike Ter Maat. All right, Mike, thank you for being here, first of all. I know it's busy life in Washington right about now.
Well, the good news is I'm not actually in Washington. I'm a couple hours south. It is busy where I am, but only because I make it busy, not because where I live is busy. Speaking of busy, my wife obviously brought home a cat last year, so this thing wanders in front of the
star of the show right there.
Star of the show.
Gotta love it.
And she has a sense that I'm not a cat person, if you know what I mean. I'm trying to be polite here.
She does it out of spite.
She rules the roost. It's good to be with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here. I mean,
no, my goodness. Thank you.
It's an honor, man.
And I appreciated the warning you gave me a little while ago that your first several questions might be a little bit serious, and yet I'm supposed to answer as briefly as possible, prompting the typical rejoinder that seriousness is in the eye of the beholder.
Exactly. So we'll jump into these rapid fire ones. These first couple should be pretty easy. Pro-war or anti-war?
Easy for you. I don't know if they're easy for everybody. I'm anti-war, but I think that's an easier hard question than we give it credit.
So you didn't take the Dave Smith route and just say anti-war.
Well, it is I did say anti-war, but I believe that the reason it's an easier question than for which we give it credit is because I think every human being is anti-war. It's just that they don't realize it. They're not doing a good cost-benefit analysis in the grand scheme of things. But if you just took into consideration the war itself, you would, of course, be anti-war. And the reason I say anti-war more generally is because I think the circumstances in which war is a good idea are really far between, just not often.
Right. Absolutely.
Not impossible. We can't say impossible, right?
Sure. Well, if we've learned anything from the last 10 years, it's that anything is possible, without a doubt.
That is the one thing that we have learned. By the way, that's the one thing I cite is the difference between being older and younger, is that you're not really any smarter, which is too bad in my case, but you do realize that weird shit happens.
That is true. Second one, Medicare for all or get the government out?
Get the government out. Are these really the hard ones? These are the easy ones.
These are the serious ones.
And by the way, get the government out means a hell of a lot more than just avoiding Medicare for all. Remember that the reason we're in this pickle is because we overuse what we call insurance, which isn't really insurance in most cases. And the reason we have that is because of bastardized tax code starting in the middle of the last century. So there's a lot of onion peeling to do there, but we better move along.
I'm going to get along with this guy so well.
I know
He's
you are,
talking about
Ryan.
you, Robert, not me.
Yeah, no, he's definitely talking about you. And he's so Ryan is kind of the card-carrying libertarian out of the two of us. I have
I,
always kind of identified that way,
I
but
understand.
I've
I
lean a
understand.
little further to the right than most.
I
But
understand.
he
I've
is the
always
tried and true libertarian.
I've always been the card carrying independent, but in the independent space, the Libertarian Party has a tendency to make more sense to me than whatever else is on
Ryan,
the
remind
table.
me, in what state do you live?
I'm in Pennsylvania,
Where?
Central, the Greater State College area.
It's nice out there.
It is. It's beautiful. It's currently snowing.
Really?
Oh yeah, we had a 70-degree couple days, followed by rain, followed by a rapid decline in temperature that accumulated
We got
about 6
we
inches
got
up
the
here.
rapid decline in temperature a couple of days ago. We got like 1 hour of heavy snow, and then it all disappeared. It was very weird. I live east of Fredericksburg, east of Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
A couple hours south
Okay,
of
okay.
Washington.
My old band used to play shows down in the greater Richmond area, and there was an Ethiopian an Ethiopian restaurant that had a music venue in the basement. I want to say it was called the Blue Nile. Was one of the
I
coolest
believe
places
you.
I've
There
ever
can't be
played.
too many Ethiopian places with a music venue in the basement in Richmond, Virginia. There can't be too many of those.
Yeah, it was one of the coolest places I've ever played. Also, the only time I've ever had Ethiopian food, and it was awesome.
See,
There
now you go
have
to
it.
New Orleans and you're looking at a whole different thing. Everybody has like a restaurant in their kitchen. It's
Sure.
absolutely
And a
insane out
music
there.
venue in their basement.
Honestly, true.
Exactly.
And
So
sometimes
these
the music venue and the kitchen are the same thing.
I've
They
played those
usually
places
are.
as well, and there were health code violations to be immeasurable.
Oh yes,
I understand.
Yeah, do you remember the
give me one more
Ironworks in Pittsburgh?
question so that I can pretend like I'm following protocol.
Oh.
Sounds good. These this is an easy one. Open borders or closed borders with very selective immigration.
Open borders, completely open, anything goes,
Yep.
or closed
Closed
borders
borders with strict immigration. As far as being selective.
I understand. No. No, if those are the two options, then no.
No.
I think that you have to have at least some vetting as people come across the border, and that's for a couple of different reasons, not the least of which is political. You know, the American public is not going to put up with a completely open border. It leads to a lot of weird shit, including everything that we saw result from the Biden administration, which, and by the way, I think most people would not say the Biden administration's border was completely open either. I mean, at least they made a passing feign at slowing things down. As a practical matter, they didn't slow things down very much. It was really
No.
close to being a completely open border. But the other alternative that you suggested, a closed border with restricted immigration, I don't like that either. I'm very pro-immigration, again, for a variety of reasons that go well beyond politics. I think that it's one of the things that defines America and defines us in a very good way. It's one of the things that makes us different from other nations, and in important and terrific ways. It's where our cultural tolerance comes from.
Right. Absolutely. Now these are the ones that might get you into some trouble. So you've been a police officer, patrol officer specifically, right?
I was on the road for 11 and a half years in South Florida.
Oh wow.
Wait, where at in South Florida?
Broward County.
I lived in Pompano Beach.
There you go. There you go. I was at the other end of Broward County. I worked in the town of Hallandale. But most of those, which was not completely different from Pompano Beach, Hallandale and Pompano Beach and most of those towns have quite a range of socioeconomic and behavioral issues going on. You know, on the
Sure.
beach, you've got a lot of very wealthy people. And out by the railroad tracks and I-95, you've got a lot of not wealthy people.
It's a very big spread in a very small area for sure.
Well said.
Absolutely. So, cops or firefighters, who's tougher? I told you these ones might get you into some trouble.
Well, they would. Cops or firefighters, who are tougher?
Yep. That's a tough one, right?
It is a tough one. Before I answer, I do know the answer. I'm just hesitant to give it. I should point out that there are a couple of old sayings. One is, what do cops and firefighters have in common? The answer being they all want to be firefighters.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. Why do this is one that a firefighter will ask you on scene. As you might imagine, 1,000 times I've been on scene with firefighters. We work closely together. In the town where I worked, both of our agencies were municipal. We weren't county, right? It was a city police department and a city fire department. And so we worked together all the time.
Oh, hand in hand.
And that meant that you had to behave, right? Because you're going to see the same asshole a few
Yeah.
hours later.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
you didn't want to be a complete jerk about it, whatever you were thinking. And I think that was mutual. But what a firefighter would say is to a cop, do you know why God made firefighters? And the answer is so cops could have heroes too.
I like that.
Yeah. So that's important.
That's
And the only thing that I would share with you, when I was a training officer for about 5 years, when rookies show up, when they get out of the police academy, and even better, if you can get a hold of them while they're in the police academy, you need to say to them, it's not too late. You can still become a firefighter. You can still go to the fire academy. You haven't spent a lot of time at this. You're not in, a financial pickle because of a bad decision. You can reverse course. And I've never been able to turn anyone around, but there
no,
are
but
stories about people who quit police work early on. Many more of those stories than people who quit firefighting early on. I'm sure that there are people who quit early on in each case. When I signed up, by the way, I figured I was going to do it for a year or two, or at most 3. And I fell in love with the job, and I did it for 11 and a half, which is weird. Particularly because I was 49 in the police academy. I was on the road from the age of 49 to 60.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And it is a young man's sport in some ways. I was,
Oh, yeah.
healthy. So
What year did you go in?
What year?
Yeah.
2010.
Okay.
2010. I just retired a few years ago. It was 2021 while I was running for Congress, which is also a weird experience to run for Congress while you're a cop. But especially as a libertarian. So
right. I was going to say it's hard enough for the who was the guy out in California? He was a sheriff, and he was going to try to run for the governorship. I can't remember his name now, but he was, like a hardline Republican, and it didn't last very long before they got him on conflict of interest. So, and he was giving political speeches in uniform, and you're not supposed to do that.
No, well, he should have known better. I mean, that's just being
logic.
dumb. I'm sorry, he was disqualified for being dumb, not for conflict of interest. I mean, come on. Well, anyway, the answer to your question is, of course, that cops are tougher, but it's not a matter of, the job. It's a matter of the teasing that you have to put up with, and the occasional, I don't want to say this in a way that's too negative, but
I will.
the occasional lack of support from certain elements of one's community if you don't have thick skin, it can occasionally hurt your feelings. So,
Right.
you know, you have to be tough that way. And the teasing you get from firefighters. I'll give you an
Yeah.
example. Now, obviously, I'm a very sensitive person and I get my feelings hurt very easily. And you know I'm being sarcastic, but
Yeah, I was going to say, you're in politics. I didn't believe that for a
frequently,
second.
as a libertarian, right? Frequently, I I would find myself doing CPR when the firefighters would roll up. Finally roll up, right? After 2 of the longest minutes of your year, right?
Yeah,
And you're
exactly.
doing CPR and the captain walks over and looks at you and says something to the effect of, "Didn't I tell you last week to stop doing CPR on dead people?"
Oh my God.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
okay.
Wow.
And this was said to me more than once. Like, the reason your track record is so poor is because you keep doing CPR on dead people. Okay, but Captain, it's not my job to tell whether or not he's dead. It's your job.
Right.
And I've been waiting here for the last 2 minutes for you to show up and tell me he's dead. But until you tell me he's legally dead, I got to do my thing.
Right. Otherwise, I mean, that could go as far as dereliction of duty. If it comes down to it. My aunt was a captain on the Metro DC police force for 20 some years. And, so I grew up around police and not so much firefighters, but, those things, like, even people don't realize on scene, if you have a guy that just shot and killed 4 people in the street and you chase him down and you shoot him, you still have to perform CPR and try to keep that guy alive the entire time you're on scene, no matter how bad of a person he might be.
Been there and
You
done
have
that.
to.
Been there
Yeah.
and done that.
It's
Well, it's in my case, it was only once, and it wasn't someone that I had shot. So it was a matter of, I got to keep this guy alive because my buddy shot him,
oh gosh.
Yeah.
right?
Oh gosh.
You see where this is going, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, that's
at the
never
time,
fun.
because I wasn't there for the shooting, I roll up, 2 minutes later, 90 seconds
Right.
later. I don't know how this is going to go, but for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is you want to save this guy's life, but for a variety of other reasons. To your point about, are there weird emotions that run through your mind? You're thinking, I don't know what led to this circumstance, but I'm going to do everything I can to keep this kid alive.
Well, and after you had gotten in, I can't imagine the kind of pressure that was on you at that moment, because, you said you got it at 2010 to 2012. You had Baltimore, you had Aaron Campbell, and then Freddie Gray. You had all of those things compounded back to back. So police were really in the spotlight, and that amount of pressure of any wrong move, am I going to wind up on national news?
Yeah. Yeah. There were some tough times. I gotta say that our community was, on the whole, extremely supportive. And I think it's because some of our leadership did a good job of communicating and listening, and did all the things that, sometimes we make fun of, how
Right.
performative some of these tasks feel, setting up citizen advisory committees and knocking on doors and everything from bake sales to parties in the park and taking the kids Christmas shopping, all the stuff that cops do with with an eye roll, right? And
Sure.
the truth
Right.
is that any one of those activities may feel like a lot of work for almost no benefit. When you add it all up, I have to admit, I think it matters.
Oh, absolutely. And it really does, because one of the small communities that we have here, they do a program every year called Christmas with a Cop. And basically
Yep.
it's underprivileged families,
Yep.
that are living below poverty, and
Yep.
every day, they take a kid out with different police officers from around the area, and it's game changing because it builds a relationship with the community. Or do you want to listen to some stranger that's barking orders at you, or do you want to listen to the guy that you see in your community every single day?
Yep.
You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
it's
That's well said. And we had the advantage of not being a part of the county infrastructure. We were a police force of 100 officers dedicated to this particular town. So you had a chance to get to know people.
absolutely. If you can see a cop on duty and go, "Oh, hey, that's Ray," like
Yeah. Right.
that cop is really out
Or maybe
working
I
in the
don't know his
community.
name, but I've seen this jerk around a whole lot. So at least I know that he knows what's going on in this part of town.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, the last one. This is meant to be a fun one. Feel free. You do not have to answer it. We can edit all this in post.
The rest
But
of
when
them
we were
weren't
kids,
fun, I see. I get it. Okay.
no, this is the really fun one. This is the one that I told Ryan I'm proud of. So
boy.
if when we were kids, there was this game that we would play called Marry, Fuck, Kill. You would have 3 people. You had to choose which one you would marry, which one you would fuck, which one you would kill.
Yeah, I
So
get it.
if we're playing Marry, Fuck, Kill with these 3 world leaders, who would your choices be? The leaders are Javier Milei, Georgia Maloney, and the new gay Ayatollah.
The new gay Ayatollah. Now, before I answer, a couple things I need to point out. One, if the Ayatollah were gay, there may not be enough time to get to him. As a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, I should point out that because he hasn't been seen lately in public, maybe you're onto something. Could be an explanatory factor.
I'm just saying. That's what I've said.
Late.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the other thing I want to point out, that was number 1. Number 2, I should point out that my wife is listening.
Yeah, right.
Also fair.
Fair
also
enough.
fair.
Which
Fair
changes
enough.
the political dynamic. Okay, changes just slightly. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, what I'm going to do,
just to avoid getting beat when he gets off camera, folks.
what I'm going to do is say, I'm cashing in 2 of my cards for 2 more bullets.
Okay.
Okay. So now I got 3 I got 1 in the chamber, two backups, right?
Yep.
And I cannot shoot Millet.
Nope.
That's
Good
I'm
man.
in the same boat.
Good man.
Can't do it. Can't do it. Right?
Yep.
Can't marry him. Can't have sex with him. Can't shoot him. That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Right.
And by the way, my wife wouldn't let me within 5 miles of anyone with an Italian name. So don't even ask me that one again.
Oh,
I'm engaged to an Italian woman, so I get it.
So you know what I'm talking about.
I get it.
Yep. Everything that you need to know about the way I cannot answer that question is the following. I'm still alive. Okay. I am sitting here. I am alive.
touche.
And as we say about Labrador retrievers, intact.
Can we take 1 minute for me to fix my camera? I'm sorry.
Knock yourself out.
I'm driving my own self nuts.
I don't see what's wrong with your camera unless you actually don't look like this. By the way, settle a bet. Which one of you is the smart one and which one of you is the good looking one? Because there's a controversy.
I know nothing of the controversy.
Yeah.
I'm the generally uninformed one. I'm the one who's too busy with his day job to keep up with current events and politics.
Robert,
but
that's
I've always
his backhanded way of saying he's the good looking one. Did you notice that?
So let's jump into the situation with Iran, because that's obviously the elephant in the room right now. Everybody's talking about it. So you've talked about, the stuff like the strikes on the nuclear sites. You've talked about the possibility for broader escalation in the region. What's your read on how this is playing out right now? Is it the kind of long-term commitment we should be making, or is this just more of like a necessary tough stance?
I don't know that it's either. Part of the problem is that not only is it unknowable, but I feel like we didn't give other alternative strategies the full opportunity that they deserved. I feel like we jumped into this war slightly prematurely. And I say that from the standpoint of, I feel like this war is, technically speaking, illegal. But having said that, it may well be that it's one of those things that in the long run we had to do. But having said that, it's complicated, right? Who is we? Why is we always the United States in this particular case? Why did we not build a coalition in advance? And why did the timing get driven by the government of Israel? The definition of we, I don't like in this case. I don't like the definition of we, even if you come to the conclusion that we had to do something. I don't like that. I don't like the timing in a couple
Well,
of
no.
contexts. I don't like the timing being what Marco Rubio described. We had to go because Israel was going and we would get the blowback if we didn't go, so we went. That's tail wagging dog stuff right there. I got a problem with that. But the other timing problem I have is relative to the front end and relative to the back end. What I mean by that is I think it was too quick regarding negotiation and too soon regarding nuclear weapon development. In other words, I would have waited until nuclear weapons were more imminent. And that doesn't mean you wait until some idiot's got his finger on a button. I don't mean it like that, right? You know, if you got to go, you got to go. And there are times when a preemptive attack is necessary. Those times are few and far between, but they do include some idiot cleric who is in power only because he's a crazy fool who says we want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth and the United States is the great Satan. Okay, so there may not be a lot of circumstances in which you have to preeminently attack, but the clerics running the show in Tehran, at least they're showing leadership, if not running the show, because I think that the IRGC is actually calling the shots. But the clerics running the show certainly make a good argument for preemptive attack, right? They
Absolutely.
If you wanted to be attacked prematurely, you would say most of the things that those idiots say, right?
Exactly.
So it's not like on an ethical level, you're going to feel bad for these idiots. Now, having said that, I do wish the negotiation had been given more time, both between the United States and Tehran, as well as among the United States and our Western European partners and our Middle Eastern partners and the government of Israel. I think that there was a negotiation there to be had. By the way, I think the Trump administration made a bad mistake in effectively ripping up the Obama agreement when they did. I have no doubt that we could have gotten a better deal than Obama had gotten. I'm sensitive to that argument. But it is not true that the Obama deal was worse than nothing. It was better than nothing. It was only a time play. But time matters. Time
Absolutely
matters. So I think that the administration made a number of mistakes here. The big one, there's two big mistakes. One is not going to Congress and the American people. And the reason that's a mistake is because it makes this whole thing illegal. And that matters. If you're France, maybe that doesn't matter so much. But if you're the United States, it matters a whole hell of a lot because it's the difference between us and the rest of humanity. We're not just a democracy We are the democracy. We are the constitutional democracy that taught the rest of the world how to do this. And we have called that for 100 years American exceptionalism. And to flush down the toilet, American exceptionalism is a huge loss. And I feel like we've taken a step in the direction of doing that, and that's a problem.
Would you mind if I play the idiot in the room for a minute? Because like I said, I don't have as much time to keep up on this stuff, except for when I'm trolling politicians on X, which is fun, and you should do it while drinking. It makes it way better. As far as the illegality of the war, continue. I'm gonna continue here. I don't podcast or play music sober. It's rules. Indication I got was that the legal standing was 48-hour notification to Congress and
The War Powers Act.
Right. So I thought that what I had read was that Congress was notified, and if they within 48 hours, obviously. And then the War Power Resolution did pass, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Like, this is outside my wheelhouse.
Mike, if you don't mind, I'll take this one. Unpopular opinion: the War Powers Act is not and has never been constitutional, but every president has been able to use it to their advantage since, so no one has ever bothered to question it.
So is there something outside of the current legality of this action that makes this action different from something like Afghanistan or Iraq?
Yes.
No official declaration.
Well,
Okay.
let me jump in. There's two important differences.
Please.
One is, yes, the War Powers Act is probably unconstitutional, but more important than that, it has been incorrectly interpreted in an unconstitutional way. If it were interpreted correctly, it would actually be more constitutional. The War Powers Act was passed in 1973, or 74, 73, I think. It's actually technically the War Powers Resolution. The War Powers Resolution being in 73 is everything you need to know about it. It was not passed in order to give the White House any authority whatsoever. It was passed for the opposite reason, because Congress was so pissed at Nixon for bombing Cambodia. So what it said was, if you're going to do something stupid, you've got to reveal it to us. Now, it was not meant to say, and therefore you get to do something stupid as long as you reveal it to us. As a matter of fact, it explicitly says, we do not mean, therefore you get to do something stupid and then after the fact reveal it to us. This, correctly interpreted, means even if you do something illegal, you're still obliged to inform us after the fact.
Okay.
Right.
Now, presidents have acted stupid. And I don't mean they have acted stupidly. I mean they have acted stupid. They have pretended to be stupid. Think Barack Obama, 2012, constitutional law professor who decides that he can actually do things that in 2008 he knew damn well he couldn't do, right? Presidents like to pretend like they're idiots and assume power to themselves that they don't have. And so they bastardize the War Powers Resolution, and courts have allowed the White House to get away with this because courts believe that it is up to Congress to stop them. And Congress hasn't done a damn thing to stop the White House, so the courts have washed their hands of this whole mess. The other reason this is problematically different is because all those other cases, the White House did go to Congress in advance. Now, you can argue that the Bush administration was, dishonest or stupid. I prefer to believe that they were being stupid and biased as opposed to dishonest and delinquent, but we may never know completely. But at least they went to Congress to make their case, as bad as it may have turned out to have been. in advance.
Agreed.
And that's a big difference. The other thing that I think that we need to focus on, or at least not forget, is that the exceptions to Congress and only Congress having the authority to declare war is for the president to protect us against an imminent threat.
Sure.
And aside from just claiming that the word imminent means something different than we all know it to mean, there has been no argument put forward that we were under an imminent threat. None whatsoever. No one is arguing that. People are arguing that the word imminent actually means, well, they would have attacked us sometime in the next 18 months. But we all know that's not what it means. And the reason you know that's not what it means is because otherwise the exception makes no sense, right?
Right.
If you have time to have a conversation with Congress, if you've got 72 hours and a telephone, you can have a conversation with congressional leadership. If you've got, I mean, to be honest, if you've got 96 hours and a telephone, you ought to be able to have a vote of the entire House and the entire
right.
Senate. But, you know, this idea that we had months to go, but it's an imminent threat in the context of we need an exception from informing Congress or asking for congressional support literally makes no sense. That's, you know, that would mean that there's a mismatch between why there's the imminent threat exception and from what it is an exception, right? You can't claim you need a year's heads up to give Congress a conversation. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. No, exactly. And I think today, their imminent threat argument kind of blew up in their face. That being Joe Kent's announcement today. He sent a letter to President Trump and said, after much reflection, I've decided to resign from my position as director of the National Counterterrorism Center effective today. I cannot, in good conscience, support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. I'm going to go ahead and say full stop. We don't need to hear any more than that. Obviously, Trump came out and countered that and said that this guy was a known leaker and had been left out of intelligence discussions for some extended period of time. But, you know, how much of that is, typical first line of defense from the administration.
Well, the other thing, good for you for bringing it up. By the way, Joe Kent has been a Trump supporter for years. And an ardent Trump supporter. He has no skin in a game of running against the president just gratuitously. But the other thing I think that needs to be said is that this is not a big reveal, right? No one is arguing there is an imminent threat.
Right.
The only argument is the definition of imminent being something that we know it not to be. But no one is arguing that the Iranians were going to attack us in a few days.
My biggest complaint about modern day politics is that we just change the definitions of everything daily.
Wait till you're my age.
Fair.
Wait till by the time you're my age, you will have seen certain words that are on their third definition in your lifetime.
No, exactly. And we've seen kind of, with this whole situation with Iran, my biggest worry is that what is supposed to be a short 4-week operation is going to wind up being something much, much longer, or potential for expansion out. I mean, you've mentioned that, things like Russia helping Iran with drones. Obviously, there's been some oil market reactions. That obviously in turn affects China's energy supply. And, from a military perspective, all of this stuff makes sense if we're trying to get ahead in the AI race or, whatever that is. But the least you could do is be honest with the American people and say that, hey, the goals of this war yes, are getting rid of a regime, but here are the side pluses for it. We're weakening China in the process. We weaken
Yep. Yep. Yep.
ex enemies in the process, but we're not getting that, and the
And
majority of people,
minuses.
unfortunately,
How
don't see it.
nice would it be if a president were to say, and there are going to be costs?
Yes, yes, and
And
that's a
on
big thing you've
balance,
talked about too.
we've decided that this is something we're going to have to bite off. It could be tough. It could be tough for a little while. It could be tough even in some respects. Hopefully not horribly, but in some respects for a lengthy period of time. But we've decided that this is something that we just have to do, and talk to us like a grown-ass adult, and we're not getting that. By the way,
No,
speaking
exactly.
of not getting the conversation at the front end, don't you also get the impression that the planning at the front end was not there in a larger sense than just communication? I do not get the impression that the White House was prepared for the mining of the Strait of Hormuz.
No,
which is wild because
Because of course.
It's the most logical defensive tactic. You've got a 22-mile wide stretch, and essentially, I think 2 miles of it is easily traversable by the oil supercarriers or whatever that they use.
That's exactly right.
And it's just logic. That's the easiest move.
Absolutely. Now, you could argue, well, I think it probably won't get mined, but I don't think you can argue, I'm certain it won't get mined, right? If something is 20 or 30% chance of happening, you better be prepared for it when you're talking about something this important.
well,
Yes.
right, and especially considering how many allies we have in the region, you can't tell me that Iran is not communicating with Qatar and the UAE and saying, "Hey, listen, we're going to mine the Strait of Hormuz. Keep your ships out of it." And nobody bothered to relay that back to the U.S. government in time.
I mean, they also panic fired a bunch of missiles at like most of those countries on the initial attack. So,
and I
True.
didn't get the impression that the White House had been diplomatically prepared for that either. I got the impression from some of those nations that they felt like they got caught with their trousers down. In other words, I didn't hear the UAE or Qatar. I didn't hear any of them say, this sucks, but the White House gave us a heads up and we're allies and we're in this together and the United
Right.
States is going to take care of us. We're not hearing that.
No, and it was a very different situation when the first round of strikes happened in Iran when we took out the nuclear facilities, because you look at Qatar and you look at I believe it was even Lebanon, all of the bases in the region, they were shooting down the rockets as they were coming in. We didn't even have to touch half of it, but there was communication and they were all together. And we just, like you said, we haven't seen that since this conflict started.
Yeah, well,
So
you're
where do you,
exactly right.
where do you see this playing out long term? I mean, from a not necessarily just a military perspective, but from the political perspective, because you do have quite a few prominent figures on the MAGA side of the base that are finally kind of stepping away and going, hold on, wait a minute, this isn't America first. Where do you see this playing out long term for Trump and potentially in the region?
Not only in the region, but in Europe, it's a real problem. When the United Kingdom says you can't use our air base, what?
Yeah.
Yep.
What?
We pay for that air base. What are you talking about?
I was shocked. And now
Spain said it too. Woo. Almost lost the
Spain
camera.
said it too. Now, and the fact that the Spanish said it was an insult, but when the British say it, it's an injury. That's a real problem. And now we have NATO allies that the White House claims have assets that could help us out in the Strait of Hormuz, and they're not putting up the assets to help us.
Right. It tests
How
the
far we
commitments.
have fallen.
Yeah.
How far we
Well,
have fallen.
absolutely.
And in an unmanaged sense, we have withdrawn last week from 66 different international organizations because they pissed us off. Most of them United Nations affiliates. We can't just dump the entirety of the United Nations. By the way, I have long been for the idea of extricating ourselves from NATO and the United Nations in a managed sense. If you come to me and you say, we're going to rewrite these agreements because we don't think it's in our interest to fork over billions of dollars every year to the United Nations so that they can have this annual party where they call us evil and stupid. And we don't think it's in our interest to oblige ourselves to bail out countries that refuse to spend even half of what we do per capita GDP wise in terms of defense. We just don't think that's in our interest. We're going to renegotiate these things. It's going to take a while.
Right.
We're going to take the rest of the year to manage our way through this. And, we still love the French, which is a hard thing for me to say. We still love these people and we want good relationships.
Yep.
I'm all about that. I think that is the direction you want to go. You do not want to get into a war and then once you're in it, say, well, I'm withdrawing from all these organizations and I'm upset that our NATO partners aren't helping us out because something has caused oil prices to spike. Our stock market is crashing. I don't have the assets to do anything about it, and I failed to plan. That is not the time to renegotiate NATO.
Sure.
Well, no, and you brought up a good point there, very briefly, is with the economy, not just are we having issues within NATO, but we kind of indirectly started a trade war with China again, with the tariffs, and so this is just going to put a further strain on that, especially in terms of global shipping. I mean, this is going to have negative ramifications on that end too.
Of course it
Now,
is. And where are the Chinese turning for oil now? The Russians.
Yep.
So we've driven these people together. We've made half the world hate our guts. And the Trump administration did such terrific work in Trump 45 to bring together the governments in that area, right?
yeah,
The Saudis were about to launch into a robust relationship with the Israeli government in a way that I think most of us would have thought were virtually impossible just a few years ago. I was astounded what a great job the Trump administration did in brokering the Abraham Accords. Really
yes,
impressive, creative, outside the box thinking, taking advantage of timing and doing so with potentially very, very positive lasting effect. And I can't help getting the feeling that we're putting all of that at risk right now by disrespecting all these people in the area. And by the way, as someone who has for a long time felt like the Israeli government and the American government need to have an arm's length relationship and completely distinct and separate foreign policies. That doesn't mean we can't be allies. It doesn't mean we can't work together on projects. But our two governments need to be able to make decisions like grown-ass adults, not
Sure.
dependent
Yep.
on each other, right? Having said
Yep.
that, and being a pro-Israeli guy, I mean, I've traveled Israel. I've had my kids travel Israel. The Holy Land, huge, the cultural connections. A lot of Americans feel that connectivity, right? And I share in that. But having said that, I can't help getting the feeling this is not going the direction you would want it to go in the very long run for Israel.
no,
If 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 you were going to look for a way to risk pushback, you would do what you did in Gaza, and then immediately on the heels of that, squeeze the United States into what their own laws say is an illegal war. At some point, the pushback against the Israeli government is going to matter. It's going to pinch. I think the Israelis have overplayed their hand.
Well, and I think we're starting to see more and more of that just in day-to-day life, because think about this, going back even 5 years ago, a guy like Nick Fuentes would never have been taken seriously outside of his tiny little group. But now you have people like Piers Morgan. You have guys like Steven Crowder that are, on the right wing spectrum. You have a lot of very big names bringing this guy on to make his case. That right there for me was a stark change in just the overall discourse among everyday Americans of, hey, is our relationship with Israel becoming a bigger problem? Is the juice worth the squeeze? And that was something that had never been talked about before. Even after 9/11 and the Iraq war, none of that had ever really been discussed, and now it's coming more and more into the mainstream, and people are bringing up the rise in anti-Semitism.
Yep. Well, that's a really interesting point. I think, not only do I think that Israel has overplayed its hand, but I think that there's an irony here in the Trump administration. Well, President Trump himself, having come to power, campaigning on what was basically an anti-war platform.
Yes.
Right. And
large part of why I voted for him.
Of course. Right. Of course. And gave the nation a taste of, it's okay to be anti-war. That doesn't mean you're not a tough guy. Right. It's okay to be Republican and anti-war. That doesn't mean you're an isolationist. It doesn't mean that you shrink from responsibility. It doesn't mean that you don't want a strong defense. It doesn't mean that you don't believe in peace through strength. It can mean a new updated version of a muscular foreign policy, but not an interventionist one, and one that recognizes the cost of war. It made sense for a lot of people, and Trump represented a rallying point. And I think that there's a certain irony that having given people the courage to admit out loud we're anti-war, that now he wants, to a certain extent, for that narrative to be put back in the bottle for a few months.
And that's a genie you can't put back in the bottle.
It ain't happening.
And I think I think to even further that point, I think people, the American people at large, understand the concept of peace through strength, including, Donald Trump's voter base. And this is a good segue into the next topic I wanted to bring up, was the American people are okay with a show of force. They're not okay with long-term foreign entanglement. At least that's what I would like to think. Primary example of that was Venezuela. You didn't see a drop in support from Trump's voter base when we went in and snatched Maduro in the dead of night. It was a targeted operation. No American lives were lost. It was a show of force of like, hey, you said come and get you. Well, knock, knock, bitch. We're here. And people were fine with that. This is a completely different scenario. With that, I know, in previous years, I had seen podcasts. I know you'd done one with Spike Cohen, and you talked a lot about the failed war on drugs. And this has marked a really stark shift in what people would consider the war on drugs, from policing U.S. streets to actually attacking the source of the drug trade itself. Do you think that this administration's position designating cartels as terrorist groups, do you think this is the right shift in what people would call an extension of the war on drugs?
I think it's logical. It might even be tactically sound. One of the problems I have with it is that it's illegal, and the other problem I have with it is that the illegality in this case matters. Look, all legality matters, but this
Absolutely.
illegality matters in a pretty serious way. The United States has long held that we do not remove heads of state. And
Right.
that's apparently gone now, and it's gone merely because President Trump said so. That's a problem, right? Again, did not work with Congress. Okay. But in this case, what really matters is didn't work with the court. There is no such thing as a court issued warrant that you can serve outside of jurisdiction.
Right.
You don't,
Right.
you know,
And we saw that from the Biden regime when they tried to do it. It was just posturing. It was a political stunt.
and so, on an ethical matter, do I care about Maduro? Of course he's a bad guy, and not just because he was exporting poison to the United States, which would, fuck him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one should stand
But
up
also
for that.
fuck him for what he did domestically in his own country.
Thank you. So you've got all kinds of reasons to welcome his departure. Some would go so far as to welcome his death, right? On ethical grounds. I get that. I don't have much of a counter argument to that. All that
Right.
makes sense. I mean, it does, right? It sucks to suck. Bad things happen to bad people in a good world. And sometimes this world is every bit as good as you would hope it would be. But the legality matters, because the alternative is that we are not a nation of law, that we are a nation of executive power and concentrated authority. And again, that might be okay if you're France, but it's not okay if you're the United States, because we're the place that has an obligation to teach the rest of the world how this is done. And if we're
Absolutely.
not any longer in the business of teaching the world how this is done, nobody is. And that's a problem, because the big debate for our species over the last few hundred years is basically, do you want to live in a world defined as a zero-sum game between competing tribes where smash mouth power is all that matters? Or do you want to recognize what the Enlightenment taught us, what Adam Smith taught us, what Milton Friedman taught us, which is if you all behave and you recognize that we can govern ourselves in a legal sense, we all get rich and we stop killing each other. Now, if we don't learn that lesson, we're going to go in as did dinosaurs for different reasons. That's just the truth of the matter. What is at stake is enormous, 1,000-fold more important than this administration.
Absolutely. Now, one thing you mentioned with Iran that we are kind of seeing with Latin America, again, timing is obviously it's a little delayed, but we're seeing the Shield of the Americas coalition pop up that is, it's allowing for joint military action against the cartels. Obviously, it's a big pivot from the days of like Plan Colombia, right?
Right.
But from I want you to tackle this from the economist perspective. Does this approach, this multinational approach, does it make sense for tackling fentanyl and trafficking, or is it could it just lead to more blowback?
Both. I think it has to be a multinational effort. It has to be an international effort, both from the standpoint of legal legitimacy, even if you can't quite get there according to domestic law, at least you've got an international fig leaf that gives it a veneer of legality. And I think that that matters. It's a hell of a lot better than just having a president say, I can do whatever I want, which is what we have now. So I do think that that matters, but it also matters from the standpoint of what happens when you shut down a domestic industry in some country. It just migrates someplace else. So you have to have as many of the alternative hosts on board with your program as possible, right?
Well,
If
exactly. Because you're
yeah,
not
if
stopping the shipping of precursors from China, but you might be stopping where they're going to. But if we've seen one thing from China, it's that they know how to. I mean, look at the Belt and Roads Initiative.
yep.
They know how to build relationships with people purely based on economic power. So, is it actually going to solve the problem if you don't have everybody around you on board? And
Yeah,
that includes Claudia Scheinbaum in Mexico.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. You need everybody on board, and you may, if I were in Trump's shoes, I would be trying to build a relationship with the Mexican government that was so strong that Claudia would eventually invite joint operations, right?
Right.
You guys have you guys up there in north in Washington have assets and intelligence that we could use. We've got a problem out. Everyone knows there are huge parts of the nation of Mexico that are not under the control of Mexico City. That is,
Right.
from the standpoint of the Mexican government, that cannot be tolerated. That cannot be tolerable. That is not something that a modern nation should be putting up with. And the fact that they don't do enough about it to the point of inviting us in, I think is a red flag. That's a problem. If you're not doing
Absolutely.
everything you can to clean that up, I got to ask why. Do you lack the courage or the incentive structure, the creativity, or you just hate Washington? I don't know what it is, but you've got to think outside the box. And so I appreciate the shield concept because I think it's showing a little leg in terms of creativity. But I wish that Congress were more behind this, as I do wish that the domestic governments in these respective nations were behind it as well.
Yeah, and I think a large portion of this, and I could be wrong, especially with the Shield of the Americas, we need to be urging these partnered nations to not just help us deal with the drug cartels directly and militarily, but we also need to start having a discussion of, hey, you guys need to look inward, because we looked at what happened after the CIA got involved with Pablo Escobar and the drug trade then, and all it did was it created more corruption and more of a power vacuum in the government. It allowed the cartels to gain more control, and it's never gotten back on track.
It was a
So
mess.
it was an absolute mess. And so my worry is that, where do we go from here? Because obviously blowing up boats in the ocean in international waters is only going to get us so far.
Yeah.
But, where's the end game?
I think that the end game has to include both sealing off the border to drugs, and I think it requires treating demand for drugs in a very different way than we have up until now. As
Yes.
a cop, I had a real good view of a real bad policy. The idea of
Yep.
criminalizing simple possession, it um, it doesn't work. That's a problem. It throws a lot of people in jail. That's another problem, because jailing people is
Uh-huh.
enormously expensive. And I don't just mean the dozens of thousands of dollars a year it takes to jail someone, but all of that lost productivity, the disruption in people's lives, the destruction of families, undermining family structure, undermining entire communities. The cost, I just don't think most Americans realize how enormous these costs are by criminalizing the possession of drugs. For this reason, I
Absolutely.
think we need to recognize that we need to do something different.
Well, and on that note, because you do have that perspective of coming from the police side, the law enforcement side of
I've
things,
done a lot of
um,
CPR on dead people.
right, and so what kind of preparations should we be making here domestically? Because obviously, as the drug trade slows down, if this does work and either stalls or hopefully stops the flow from at least a few directions, um, domestically, we need to be taking precautions to deal with the blowback of that, because the amount of people that are on fentanyl or heroin, those people are going to be cut off eventually, or it's going to, just like anything else, supply and demand, the price is going to skyrocket. There's going to be less
Yeah.
access. People are going to turn to riskier alternatives, just like we saw with the opioid crisis. They went from pills to heroin to now somebody goes to the bar and does a bump of cocaine and they're dropping dead because there's fentanyl in it.
There's to your point, there's a migration from one drug to another. If you're a user, there is migration of the location of suppliers from one country to another, including into a domestic production capacity in the United States, right? As well as a certain resilience in terms of addicts doing whatever it takes to get their hands on things. This is not
Yeah.
this is not easy, and it's not cheap. We know from the data that there are certain programs that can help on the demand side. They're expensive. I
Yeah.
don't think they're as expensive as jailing people, but they are
Fair.
expensive, and it requires a commitment. And that commitment is going to require a bit of a culture shift in this country. I don't know that we're
Yes.
there. I don't know that we're going to be there in the next couple of years. Screw ups like Portland, Oregon don't help any. When people see a half-assed attempt winding
Or
up
British
in
Columbia.
British Columbia, these are not helping the cause, right? What you
Right.
need are well-managed deregulation and decriminalization attempts, coupled with treatment for addicts and resources dedicated to get people off. That's the only way that this is going to work. Decriminalization that's half-assed, that's still regulated, that allows idiots to be peddling this stuff, allowing addicts to be shooting up on sidewalks, undermining
Yep.
the fabric of the community itself. This is not helpful.
No, and another part of my worry, which actually kind of segues into one of the domestic policies I wanted to talk to you about, is something like that would require a very large private-public partnership, because you'd have to have drug companies, you'd have to have healthcare companies on board that are willing to, put up the investment for these resources. With that said, there's a lot of pressure on those very same companies because of the Trump administration's new regulations as far as drug manufacturing goes, transparency rules. Trump has the Trump RX program, which, while that's being done in conjunction with these manufacturers, it's also cutting out the middleman with insurance. So you're seeing these dents in domestic policy in these relationships. How do you go about repairing a relationship like that if you're going to move into a public-private partnership to deal with the domestic effects of this war on drugs?
Well, first of all, if I say anything that leads you to believe I think it's easy, I have misspoken. It is extremely
Right.
difficult, and at the end of the day, it's going to take federal resources. I don't think there's any getting around that. But it's a migration of resources from the pursuit of the strategy that we have now, which is extremely expensive. So I don't think I'm really suggesting that you spend any more money than we are now. We just have to spend it profoundly differently, right? As far as the
Agreed.
drug companies participating, look, it is true that the federal government of the United States makes these companies a lot of money.
Yeah, it does.
we make them a tremendous amount of money, and in multiple ways. First of all of the apparatus in place to protect intellectual property, right? The patent system is what makes these folks their bread and butter. And as an economist, I'm all about protecting their intellectual property, so that they have the proper incentives to develop drugs for the future. That is true. That's not just a talking point from Pfizer. That really is how it works. I do believe that we need to institute a most favored nation pricing program. If we're going to be the only government that stands up for the protection of their intellectual property, we can't have them undermining the market, selling to other nations more cheaply. That's not how this
Right.
works, right?
Right.
You're going to have to sell at one price to the entire world. Is that going to cost you a few pennies? A few pennies. Very, very few pennies. Now, it might hurt other nations a little bit. That's one of the things that I worry about.
Well, yeah, when they raise the prices across the board for everybody, to
Yeah.
try to meet that.
Yeah, you're going to
and
cut
we're
out
at
a lot of folks. You're going to cut out a lot of folks, and that's something that is going to get dumped in the lap of foreign policy experts. But the other thing that needs to be said is the insurance structure that we have set up in the United States, largely through Medicare, but also through the tax incentives that we've set up for commercial insurance, makes these companies tremendous amounts of money, right?
Well,
It's
and
just
then you add the PBMs in on top of that, and we just overlook all of that. And that the PBMs are an absolute scam.
huge amounts of money. And then
What's
the idea
PBMs?
that we've given these people protection from liability in so many cases is enough to just choke a horse. It's more than I can bear. So is there enough incentive there for them to help work through in a self-interested fashion the investments required to pursue a different type of war on drugs? Yes, there is enough incentive. I would not adopt the posture that we're just going to screw these people because they've made trillions. What I'm trying to say is they have enough skin in the game that they have plenty of self-interest and motivation to pursue public-private partnerships.
Absolutely. Ryan, the PBMs are the pharmacy benefit managers, so they're the middleman. They'll tell you that they're negotiating down drug prices, and in reality, they're really they're negotiating them down, but they're making the other 20% or whatever it is. The PBMs are owned by the insurance companies, and it's
Yes,
all
in
an
many
internal
cases, they
cycle.
are directly controlled by the insurance
Okay.
Aetna
or the
is probably one of the
manufacturers.
biggest offenders.
Yeah. So it's not like they're saving us any money. It's just cutting up the profit in a different fashion.
Absolutely. And so I guess the one other thing I wanted to bring up, and this is because of your economist background, I think something that has been really overlooked and hasn't been questioned enough, is the Trump savings accounts. That, for Ryan, if you're not familiar, that's the $1,000 seed from the government.
Oh, I got a text from my dad saying set it up for your kids. There, or for actually, I think for my youngest daughter, because I think she falls within
the federal government is still throwing in $1,000 this year, aren't they?
That is what I was told. I have not set it up yet, but I was told to do it, which if they're going to take my money and give it back to me, I guess I should probably do that.
No, it's free money. Belly up to the trough, young man.
Yeah.
Right. So from your perspective, obviously as an economist, what's the gut reaction to this? Is this actually a cool way to help families get ahead, or is this just another government program, another slush fund that's going to get mixed into the whole money laundering scheme of the federal government?
Well, of course it is. And I know that we need to be polite because Ryan's listening and we want him to take advantage of this $2,000 free dollars.
You freeloader. Yo, welfare queen.
I haven't even done it yet. I haven't even done it yet. I just
No.
heard about it.
Don't leave that on the table. As long as Robert and I are paying in, you know, we
I'm
want,
paying in too.
as long as the three of us are paying in, you gotta, I mean, the program is set up with the belief that you'll take advantage of it. If we're paying in and you're still not taking advantage of it, it feels like a lose-lose. No, I'm not a big
right.
fan of the government getting into creating these accounts. It's got more flexibility than the regular IRA. It's got more flexibility than the uh, college savings accounts, the 529s and stuff like that. You know, that's fine, right? Whatever incentive to avoid taxation is fine. But passing out the free money, I think, is going too far. I would like, there are some of the political pushback has been people saying, well, this is the Trump administration's way of getting the camel's nose under the Social Security tent, that eventually this is going to be a way to replace Social Security, and he's getting pushback for that. If I thought that were true, I would love it, right?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And maybe in the long run, it does turn into that sort of thing, but I wouldn't do the free money up front. I think that undermines the whole thing. It makes it look like if we do want it to become a replacement for Social Security, that means we've got to start throwing in more federal money to sweeten the deal for all the youngsters, and that's not a position we want to be in.
Well, absolutely. I mean, and not just that, but the thing that we've danced around, I think, this entire discussion, because we know we'd spend the rest of the time on it, is we just passed $39 trillion in debt, and so with these $1,000 savings accounts, these $1,000 savings accounts, if you take the normal birth rate, roughly 3.6 million a year. I mean, you do the math. You just added that to the deficit, and you're not cutting the deficit in any way with a war in Iran. And so, long term, I can't help but pivot to Argentina and say, well, at what point is reckless spending going to catch up with us? Because we see the undertaking Milei has there, and the immense pain that the people in that country are going through. And I can't help but look at that and go, is that our future in 10 years or 20 years if we continue this reckless spending?
Well, the answer is yes. Not exactly like Argentina. It'll be our own special version of financial crisis. One of the problems with our own version of it is that it brings down, if we were to go through a financial crisis in which we failed to be able to make an interest payment, right? If the federal government missed an interest payment, it would immediately collapse the bond market, which would bring down the dollar market, which would bring down equity markets, right? The problem is that crisis would quickly be exported around the world because the dollar is the reserve currency in which transactions take place on this planet. So you're talking about a worldwide depression. And you're talking about a worldwide depression in which financial markets don't work very well. That's a problem, because the way you get out of a depression is for financial markets to do their job. Capital has to migrate. You've got to hit rock bottom and build your way out of it. You need some nations to be doing not as crappy as other nations at any point in time. She knows I'm not a cat person. She knows. They know. They sense it. They
do.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
they do it intentionally.
They do it intentionally. I know, because my dog is much better behaved, and I adore him, right? And he's much better behaved.
I've never been a
That's
cat
problem.
person.
You're talking about a worldwide depression, and potentially a significant one, with a very protracted recovery period, because things wouldn't necessarily work very well. That's a problem to be avoided. And that's on the back end. On the front end, the problem is that it's virtually impossible to see it coming in an intermediate sense. In a long-term sense, you see it now, which is why you brought up the
Right.
question, to which the answer
Right.
is obviously yes, it's coming. So you see it in the long run, and in the short run, it's too late, right? By the time, if you've got a signal that it's about to happen, it's too late. Because
It's the old, if you see me coming, you're already dead. Like,
if
Yeah.
you see me coming, you're already dead. You don't have enough time
Yep.
to react. People bigger and smarter than you are pulling their money out of markets. Kiss your ass
Yep.
goodbye. So the real issue is in an intermediate sense, does anyone do anything about it? And I don't think our politics are set up right now to do anything about it. That's a problem.
Absolutely. Ryan, I feel horrible. I've dominated this discussion. Force a habit from
Oh,
the old
no.
podcast days, used to it just being me and
This
somebody
is-
else. So
I will forever maintain that my position is being the village idiot in this scenario, because I don't study this. So I hear what you're talking about. I'm like, okay, cool. It sounds like the U.S. government is the too big to fail equivalent of the global market. Okay,
It
cool.
is, with no one to bail us out. That's the problem. We're too big to fail, and we're gonna fail.
Yeah, well, which makes sense. But what's that look like? Is somebody going to eventually call us on the bluff?
Yeah. Yeah. We will
Right.
eventually not be able to make a payment, or it is going to come close to not being able to make a payment, and people will know it, and then there'll be a run on the bond market and a run on the dollar, and that'll drive up interest rates for us, and then that will precipitate a failure. So that's how it'll go, and it'll be a difficult thing from which to recover.
Ryan, I want to give you one. I'm going to give you the opportunity because I know this will be the
I
last
didn't-
one.
I didn't take notes tonight. I'm warning you.
I was the one that took the notes.
Fair.
So this is up your alley, Ryan. The institutional investor ban in the housing market. Obviously trying to restrict the big companies like Blackstone from buying up single family homes. Is do you think this is actually going to help level the playing field, or could it backfire massively? What do you think is the more likely option?
Well, it definitely backfires. You can't pull institutional capital out of a market and not recognize that it's going to get more expensive. When you
Right.
drive capital into a market, you make it cheaper. The reason it's at all controversial is because people are considering the housing market to be two different markets. It is, in my view, correctly viewed as one market, but people view this as having two different pieces, right? You got the rental market and you got the market to acquire homes. And when institutional investors come in, they drive down rents, right? Relative to prices, because they're incentivizing the construction of new housing. And they're pulling housing from the ownership market into the rental market. So you've got new stuff coming in online into the renter market that'll help with renters. It makes it cheaper for them. Is it possible that in the short run that makes it more expensive to buy a house? Absolutely. On balance between those two, all added up, it makes housing cheaper. In the long run, what you want is for that to spawn new construction specifically for homeowners. The problem
Absolutely.
is that our construction market has been undermined every which way it can be. Not only is it
Well,
hard
it
to
has.
get it's hard to get permits because of the permitting process itself in most urban areas. Then you've got zoning problems, which in my view are unconstitutional and at least unethical. and stupid in the sense that everyone's upset about land being so valuable, and then you take half the land off the market and you complain. I'm sorry, I can't help you, right? If you're in San Francisco on the city commission and saying no multifamily in 80% of the city, I'm upset that we don't have more affordable housing. I can't help you. You're too stupid. I don't know how you lace up your shoes
So,
in the morning.
California is the spearhead of regulating construction into the ground.
Absolutely. And then to layer on top of that, as though that weren't enough layers of stupidity, as we came through COVID, we shut down many of these construction projects. And in markets like these, they don't come back so fast.
Sure.
And remember, a lot of construction companies were badly damaged coming out of 2007, 2008, 2009, the big recession. A lot of these people never came back. And as they were trying, they got told by their state governments to shut down during COVID. Now we're wondering, why don't people want to get into the house construction business anymore? We're not going to let you build whatever you want. We're not going to let you build wherever you want. We've driven up the cost of product by putting, tariffs on Canadian lumber and everything else you can think of. We've made this as hard as possible, but we're pissed. I'm sorry. We can't help a nation this stupid.
It does make a lot of sense.
And this is what you have. And then you've got a bunch of congressmen saying, well, we made mortgage interest deductible from your taxes to help you finance all this. It doesn't help if I'm of moderate income, I'm going for the standardized deduction all day long, which is at like $30,000 per couple these days, right? It's like at 29.2 or something, which means I can't take advantage of the mortgage interest deduction. It's only for rich people. If I'm going to get rid of a policy, it's not going to be allowing people to invest in rented housing. It's going to be getting rid of the mortgage interest deduction, which is one of these things that just helps rich people buy a second house. You talk about taking property off the market and not helping anybody. It's rich people with two houses, right? If you're really concerned about, if you're a good God-fearing Democrat and you really hate rich people and you're really concerned about housing, why are you putting up with tax policy that incentivizes rich people to have a second property taken off of the market?
Well, and you saw not just that, but I mean, you saw something similar in Argentina, where they put all the crazy price controls and then rent controls and all of that. And the people that were most affected were the middle class people that have one or two properties, and it just became cheaper for them to eat the fine for having a vacant property than it did to actually be able to rent it out to people. And so, it's the big institutional investors. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's going to make things a little bit tougher for them, but these kinds of things are only going to hurt the family that wants to sell their starter home and move into something a little bit bigger at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What I see from a ground level perspective is that the barrier to entry for anybody at this point that's looking to buy a home sometimes is credit, which is reasonable. But more often than not, what it is the cost to acquire a mortgage. You're looking at down payment, you're looking at closing costs, you're looking at things like that. And these people are getting stuck into at this point right now, the rental market. What you can rent a 3-bedroom house for is probably more of a monthly payment than what a mortgage on a 3-bedroom house would be. If not like comparable.
In plenty of markets, that's the case. Yeah.
They can afford the payment. They just can't get ahead enough to afford to actually take on the mortgage in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a huge, huge problem. We need more capital on the market, and that means deregulating. Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Absolutely.
generally a fan of deregulating.
Me too.
I know you
Me
are.
too. You get the
Generally.
government out. That's always kind of been my motto.
My cat's name is Thomas Jefferson, if that gives you any inclination.
Wow. I'm impressed.
I love it. Why am I just learning that, Ryan?
Well,
I'm disappointed in you.
He goes by TJ. I also have a Thomas Jefferson quote tattooed on my chest.
That's
Wow.
fair enough.
I do. With much to the chagrin of my parents, who don't like tattoos, but also much to the chagrin of my parents, who are relatively religious people and don't like contestation of God's will.
Now, I noticed that you didn't share with us what the quote is, and before you do, I hope it was something about the Constitution rather than say John Adams is an asshole.
It was not John Adams is an asshole. No, it's the old question with boldness even the existence of a God for some. I'm going to paraphrase this. For surely if there is a God, he would much prefer reason to, or he would much more pay homage to reason than blindfolded fear.
Yes.
So my chest says question with boldness.
Yes. I like that.
Thank you.
I love that. Well, Mike, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's almost 2 hours this late at night, so it's I'm sure everybody here is a little tired, but thank you so much for taking this time, man. I can't tell you what it means, especially because this is a new show. This is it's going to be an all new audience, so it'll be nice to see where
terrific.
this thing goes.
It's been a joy to be with you guys. I think your show is going to be very successful, not because I was on, but you will eventually have you'll eventually have good guests. You'll eventually have good guests.
We had one tonight. I mean, so
I've
far
not
we're off
been-
to the
I've
races.
not been let down yet.
It's gonna take a
Absolutely.
while. You need Thomas Jefferson on instead of my cat.
Well, would that I could.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a good point. I'll leave you with one of my favorite Thomas Jefferson quotes was about Thomas Jefferson, not by Thomas Jefferson. Actually, a couple of quotes. You had mentioned Ross Perot in 1992. In 1992, I worked for the re-election campaign for George Herbert Walker Bush. I spent all 92 full time on his staff. We found a way to lose, even though we didn't expect to. The other part of the Bush ticket was Dan Quayle, the vice president. In 1988, Dan Quayle was, as he was running for vice president, he was in a debate in which his opponent, the good senator from Texas, said, "I've heard, Senator Quayle, you compare yourself to John Kennedy. I got to tell you, I knew John Kennedy. John Kennedy was a friend of mine, and you, sir, are no John Kennedy." And that became a very famous line that everyone used to make fun of various things for years, for many years, in various versions. Right there was an Alien movie in which a character said, "You, sir, are not a human. I know humans, and you, sir, are no human." It went on and on and on.
It hit pop culture.
It hit
Exactly.
pop culture. Well, in 92, Bill Clinton made the mistake of saying something about Thomas Jefferson, and it rubbed Ronald Reagan the wrong way. And at the 92 convention, while President Bush is running for re-election, Reagan, in what I believe was probably his last speech in public, comes back after 4 years of being out of the White House. He opens up with, "It's good to be with you. At my age, it's good to be anywhere." And he's in after a few minutes, he says, "This guy, Bill Clinton, has compared himself to Thomas Jefferson. And I got to tell you, the Astrodome went crazy because we all knew the joke was coming. He couldn't even get it out,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
The next line, you know it's coming. I knew Thomas Jefferson. Crowd goes crazy. Thomas Jefferson was a friend of mine. You can't even hear the guy anymore. I mean, it's mayhem. And you, sir, are no Thomas Jefferson.
I'm going to need to find this clip.
It was absolutely worth the trip to Houston.
I believe that.
It was worth the
I
trip
bet.
to Houston. Now, one more line about Thomas Jefferson. I understand it's not there anymore, but I saw it when it was hanging on the wall at the Portrait Gallery in Washington. A typed up speech that John Kennedy delivered to a bunch of Nobel Prize winners that he was hosting for dinner, right? And the typed speech was not very interesting. It said, you know, it's good to have all you people here. You're all so smart. You know, thank you for being here. Advancing science, blah, blah, yada, yada, blah, blah, yada, yada. In the margin, in his handwriting, was written words to the effect of, except when Thomas Jefferson dined here alone.
Huh.
Now I'm interested. So I start
Yeah, right.
reading the typed up speech. And the speech goes something like this. This is the greatest collection of intellect ever seen in the White House. Except perhaps when Thomas Jefferson dined here alone.
That's brilliant.
God damn.
That is brilliant. Yeah, it's funny you brought up Reagan because I have you can't see it on camera, but I have a wall decoration back here that has my absolute favorite Reagan quote on it, and it's not missed me. It's, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. That's my all-time
He was
favorite
right
Reagan
about
quote.
that.
And the second one is, you missed me. After the shooting when the balloon popped.
That is one of the best clips of all
It's
time. And also,
awesome.
hey, I love that Reagan quote, but until you tattoo it on your chest, I still win.
Fair enough. Challenge accepted. Should I get it tattooed on my ass cheek? Or where should I get it?
Seems
No, you
degradatory.
cannot reveal where it is. And I'll leave you with this. I'll leave you with this. I don't believe in tattoos. I don't have any tattoos that you know about.
Fair enough.
An honest man.
So, exactly.
You guys have a good night. It's really been a joy to be with you. I look forward to doing it again.
If I make my way down to the greater Richmond area, I'll buy you a beer.
I would love that. Just give me a heads up before you come up the driveway. Nancy's wicked with a shotgun.
That's dope. I respect the shit out of that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, sir. This has been fantastic.
You guys take care. It's been a lot of fun. You guys are good looking, if nothing else. Ciao.
Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Say